Good morning, everyone. It is Rosh Chodesh Elul, the first day of Rosh Chodesh. Today is August 8th, and we are in the midst of a hot and humid weather pattern for much of the Midwest. Chicago is going to take a little bit of a break tomorrow from the heat, but the humidity will continue. But the real story this week is what's going to be happening on Tuesday, where extremely humid air will be making it much further into the Midwest than usual. This will include the Chicago area and I believe northern Indiana as well, South Bend, Indiana. Currently, dew points are expected to rise into the upper 70s, possibly even higher than that, but upper 70s is a good bet. It's hard to get higher than that this time of the year, so upper 70s. This means although temperatures are only going to be in the low 90s Tuesday afternoon, heat indices in some areas in the Chicago region will be approaching 109 degrees. So imagine that, 92 degrees with temperatures feeling 16 or 17 degrees warmer than they actually are. So we seriously are talking about dew points around 78 degrees. And this is believable because Chicago has had a dew point already this year of 78 degrees, and things which have already happened tended to return. And it would not be so surprising to see that dew point return as even slightly higher, 79 degrees. That would not be so surprising to see. Yesterday on the weather map, the humidity, the dew points yesterday evening were generally in the lower 70s. Some mid-70s were reported. But this air, although it's humid, this is not the real humidity, the extreme humidity that's going to be entering the Chicago area on Tuesday. So what's going to be happening is we're going to have today sunny, hot, and humid weather with highs in the low 90s. Some thunderstorms may develop late in the afternoon or this evening. Some storms could be severe, especially west of the Chicago region. Overnight lows tonight, low 70s, and as those clouds hang around tomorrow, humidity continues, but cooler temperatures, highs only in the low 80s. We'll have heat indices probably in the middle or upper 80s, but it's going to have a humid feel to it. And then after tomorrow's cool down, that's when the extreme humidity, really high humidity, probably the highest in the country, will be occurring here in the Midwest as dew points go into the upper 70s on Tuesday. I believe this originally was forecast to happen over Shabbos, but it's been pushed off. The Shabbos dew points were in the low 70s, certainly a humid day, but Tuesday we're really going to see a borderline record territory humidity as dew points rise into the upper 70s. I want to point out last night at around midnight, which would be early in the morning for this particular area in Iran, there's a city in the middle of the Persian Gulf which was reporting a real field temperature of 139 degrees. Imagine that. And the heat index, if you look it up, the heat index was about 124 degrees when you do just the heat and humidity. With the sunshine, it was the heat index, the real feel was 139 degrees. Temperature was 95 degrees with a dew point of 84 degrees. The ocean water temperature, 94 degrees. This is on the beach of, a real complicated city, and I'm not able to check the name of the city right now, but I did check the population, and there's 776 families living in the city and over 4,000 people living in this city, but not a lot of people at all. It's actually considered a village, and the city starts with a D. Perhaps we'll have more information in regards to that later today. I've never seen a real field temperature of that high ever, and temperature of 95, a dew point of 84. And also, if you look at the 7-day forecast, I'm going to get the city, but if you look at the 7-day forecast for the city, highs each day, 95 degrees, lows each day, between 92 and 95 degrees. Meaning there are days it's just 95 every single hour of the day in this city. Well, why should that be? You have an ocean water temperature at 94 degrees. The city is the size of a dot, like in the middle of ocean. Just it's right. It's going to be just about the water temperature, and the land temperature has to be a little bit warmer than the water temperature. So water temperature is 94, land temperature 95. Overnight lows, I would put them at 93. I don't know any forecast which has an overnight low of 95. I mean, that's it could be, I guess, when the humidity is that high, prevents temperatures from dropping. So, but I would think you'll have afternoon highs about a degree higher than the water temperature, overnight lows about a degree lower than the water temperature, and that's pretty consistent with what we see in the forecast. But heat indices above 120, 24/7 for the next 7 days, 24/7, and when the sun is out, the real field temperatures are up to 14 degrees higher with the brutal sunshine, so that puts the real field temperatures in the mid and upper 130s. The dark sky weather map showed a dew point of 89 degrees in the city, but if you look on the Weather Channel, they had weather.com, they had the dew point at 84 degrees. So how do I know 84 is more accurate than 89? I don't know, but I'm starting to think dark sky has their dew points sometimes might be 5 degrees off in the extreme situations. So, for example, they have a forecast dew point of 83 degrees here in Chicago Tuesday afternoon. I'm going to assume it's 5 degrees off and make that dew point 78 degrees for the forecast high, which is also consistent with what I'm hearing from other forecasts. But the highlight of the week is the extreme humidity on Tuesday. This is I believe it's a one-day event. I have to look into Wednesday, but it's a Tuesday of just very high humidity. I wish everybody a great day and enjoy the weather. Good evening, everyone. It is the second day of Rosh Chodesh. It's the first day of Elul. It's Monday evening, August 9th. We have about 1 or 2 hours left for the first day of Elul, and tomorrow is the exciting day. Tomorrow is the day when high humidity is expected to move into the Midwest, and there are different forecasts in regards to that. We're going to go ahead and look at the dark sky weather map. Dark sky weather map shows dew points hitting 81 degrees tomorrow afternoon. I have estimated that the dew points estimations are about 5 degrees off in the dark sky weather map. That would mean we would get a dew point of about 76 degrees. National Weather Service in one of these cities has mentioned that in general, the computer models have been overdoing it in regards to the dew points. We do have the Underground is forecasting dew points to approach 74 degrees. 74 degrees is humid. It's very humid, but it's certainly not record territory. It looks like, however, I would think we're going to get dew points of about 78 degrees because that's what we got a couple of weeks ago, and that's going to be very, very humid. Perhaps a dew point only of 76, perhaps a dew point of 79 degrees. The highest dew points in the country tomorrow are expected to be in the Chicago area. A few counties in Illinois may also approach dew points of 78 degrees. Heat indices are going to be real high tomorrow. The only thing is, and here's the wrench we're going to throw into this variable here, and this is going to be a big complication. The question is, will thunderstorms develop in the afternoon? That will ruin the heat. And this is the difference between a heat advisory and just not a heat advisory. And the question is, will there be thunderstorms? No thunderstorms for the morning. Environment expected to be capped. And this evening, actually, by the way, we're under a tornado watch. There could be severe thunderstorms this evening. But by tomorrow morning, we're going to have a capped environment. It's going to be very warm and extremely humid tomorrow. But the real humidity, it looks like, will be coming in probably late morning into the afternoon. That's when dew points are expected to rise into the mid and then upper 70s if this happens. Should there be thunderstorms, dew points will not rise as high. We will have to see what happens in regards to that. The most remarkable thing on the weather map today, I think, was this town in the middle of the Persian Gulf. It's a different place than a couple days ago, where the AccuWeather, the real field temperature was 155 degrees. Could you imagine that? Dew point, it showed, was 90 degrees with a temperature of 99 degrees. I think that's what it was. And the real field was 155 degrees. Unbelievable stuff. If you look at the other sources for the weather, it shows a dew point of 85 degrees was certainly possible. And is in the forecast for that town. This is remarkable humidity, dew point of 85 degrees. Temperatures were around 100 degrees. So even in that case, you're still looking at heat indices of about 130 degrees, and then when you combine that with the sunshine, we're looking at a real feel temperature of 144 degrees. Realize one more thing, that winds make it feel cooler, but when temperatures are above 95 degrees, the winds actually make it feel hotter, and I don't know how the real feel measures that. So the only official real feel is heat index, which only takes heat and humidity into account. We went over another city. We discussed a different city in the Persian Gulf where it is right next. It is a beach, basically. Water temperature 94 degrees. Daytime highs 95 degrees every single day for the next 7 days. Overnight lows 92 or 93 degrees. Some say 95 degrees for overnight lows as well, with heat indices above 120 degrees throughout the period. Certainly phenomenal stuff that's going on in Iran, and this is really the Persian Gulf, the areas in the Persian Gulf. We went in that particular city. There's 776 families living in that city, over 4,000 people. Not a lot of people, but apparently each family does have a lot of people in it. Lots of kids in each and every family over there. I think it was even in the upper 4,000. So we're talking, what is that, about 7 kids a family, around 7 children a family, which really means probably some families have 10 kids, some have 5 kids, or some have 2 kids and some have 13 kids. That's the type of families that are living in these little dots, which are in the middle of the Persian Gulf. That takes care of our podcast for today. We will mention that the heat and humidity will continue through Thursday. Heat advisory is in effect for many areas through Thursday. I don't know about Chicago yet, but we will be approaching 100 degrees heat indices all the way through Thursday. But tomorrow, it will be our one chance of heat index to reach heat advisory criteria should this extremely humid air materialize, which is dependent upon thunderstorms. If the environment becomes capped, we're going to have extremely humid air tomorrow afternoon. Dew points in the upper 70s, flirting with record territory. And again, the computer models are showing higher than that, not just dark sky. The official models are showing dew points higher than the upper 70s, but the models tend to overdo it. Climatology supports upper 70s. If thunderstorms develop, you will not see dew points that high in most likelihood. Anyways, I wish everybody a guten chodesh. Have a wonderful Elul. Use it well. Ani ledodi v'dodi li. It's a time of tshuva, a very special time of the year. And everyone be besimcha, and have a wonderful evening. Good morning, everyone. It is August 10th, and it's in the late morning, and the day is finally here. An exciting day because it is extremely humid outside, and the dew points are really, really high. This is a rarity here in the Chicago area. Right now, the state of Illinois is the most humid state in the country, and we're seeing dew points. The maximum dew point in the past 12 hours was a sauna-like 84 degrees. It's reporting on one website. Dark Sky says that parts of the Chicago area currently have a dew point of 81 degrees. The National Weather Service weather app says the dew point 78 degrees. Other sources say that the dew point, the official dew point in Chicago, is 76 degrees. Midway, according to one site, says the dew point 74 degrees. So it's been a hard time trying to figure out what the dew point is here in the Chicago area. But either way, probably the strongest indicator that we actually do have dew points currently in the upper 70s and even low 80s. Low 80s, imagine that. Low 80 dew points is from the National Weather Service forecast discussion, where it says that dew points today will remain in the upper 70s and low 80s. remain, meaning they have gone up into the upper 70s and low 80s. AccuWeather.com is reporting maximum dew points to be occurring late this afternoon at 79 degrees. And they have their models a little bit off for right now, though, where they say the dew point at noon will be 71 degrees. But it's already in the upper 70s. But either way, perhaps there are places in Chicago where the dew point is only in the low 70s, and perhaps each weather station is reporting a different dew point. But by late afternoon, dew points will be in the upper 70s, and the National Weather Service has pointed out that there will even be some locations with dew points in the low 80s. This is as high as it can possibly get. The record for Chicago is a dew point of 83 degrees. That's the highest dew point ever recorded in Chicago. So we are approaching record territory here. And what's amazing about this is that it's not just we're approaching record territory, but it also the highest dew points in the country are occurring right over the Chicago area. Now, South Bend, Indiana also is having very high dew points, a little bit less than the Chicago area. Dew points between 75 and 76 degrees. Dew points will likely go a little bit higher as the day progresses. Afternoon heat indices should top out between 95 and 105 for South Bend, Indiana. Heat indices expected to be around 110 area-wide in the Chicago area. A heat advisory is in effect for Chicago, possibly for South Bend as well, until 7 p.m. this evening. Now, the one variable that might mess up this heat is if thunderstorms develop this afternoon. As of now, the thunderstorms are expected to hold off until this evening. Some of those storms could be severe, especially with damaging winds, 55 to 65 mile per hour wind gusts with an AccuWeather max of 80 miles per hour. There also could be an isolated tornado and large hail, but the main thing will be the damaging winds with these storms, and it's unbelievable the amount of humidity. Obviously, the amount of humidity these storms are dealing with is the highest in the world. This is as intense as it gets, really. Probably on par with the monsoon in India. Just about. For a week, the dew points were between 80 and 81 degrees in New Delhi, India. We're seeing dew points here. There are places currently, dew points are in the low 80s in parts of Illinois as we speak. And the maximum dew point, I don't know if this is official or unofficial, was 84 degrees within the past 12 hours here in Illinois. Dew points elsewhere in the country, it is very difficult to find an 80-degree dew point unless you go down into Galveston, Texas, or Corpus Christi, Texas. Otherwise, plenty of upper 70s, lots of upper 70s for dew points. There's an 80-degree dew point here and there in the Iowa area. Dew points of 80 degrees make temperatures feel approximately 20 degrees warmer than what they actually are when the temperature is 90 degrees. Here in Chicago, I think it's safe to say that, the other week we had dew points. Tom Skilling reported a dew point of 78 degrees here in Chicago. If you look in the dark sky weather map, it was 76 degrees. It makes sense. Once one thing happens in a summer, the pattern continues, and we see those dew points again. It would certainly make sense to see dew points between 76 and 78 degrees today. That pushes the heat indices at 16 degrees warmer. Its dew point of 78 would make the temperature feel 16 degrees warmer than it actually is. Afternoon high 92 degrees, heat index 108. But AccuWeather is calling for 79 degrees, which would make the temperature feel 18 degrees warmer than they actually are, which would put the heat index at 110. And the National Weather Service is doing the exact same thing because they're calling for heat indices around 110. That's the peak heat index this afternoon, around 110 degrees. And we'll have to see whether dew points are in the low 70s, upper 70s. That's a question right now, depending on where you are. But by late this afternoon, we'll get a real feel. People who want to feel what it's like in India and places like that. Although we're not going to have the excessive heat, temperature is only 90 degrees, and I see all the clouds. Who knows if it's even going to make it that hot? But we will be having sauna-like conditions later on today for sure. In parts of the Chicago area, at least parts of the area, are already experiencing sauna-like conditions, and this is borderline record territory. And for the state of Illinois, there could be there have been records broken already in regards to the humidity. Be prepared for extremely strong thunderstorms. The amount of energy these storms have to work with obviously is off the charts. There's many other variables that go into the development of a thunderstorm, and those other variables perhaps are not off the charts. But the dew points certainly, I wouldn't say they're off the charts, but they're very high up on that chart. And temperature is a form of energy, but so is humidity. That's also a form of energy. It's not just temperature, not just air temperature, which is the form of energy. Dew points also are. Both of them transmit energy. They both can energize the thunderstorm. So we're dealing with both high air temperatures and high dew points. Therefore, there certainly is room to say that we could be getting some strong storms later on today. I wish everybody a wonderful day. And the heat is here through Thursday, by the way. It's not going to be as humid, but continued hot and very humid. Just not extremely humid through Thursday. Heat indices of 100 to 106 each day through Thursday. Another extreme heat wave is developing up in the Pacific Northwest. Record heat, no doubt about it. Temperatures will be breaking the records by at least 5 degrees for many cities. 105 for Portland, Oregon later on this week. 98 degrees for Seattle, Washington. That will be breaking the old record of 92 degrees. These 90s and 100s go all the way up into southern Canada, just boiling hot air up in the Pacific Northwest. I wish everybody a great day. Have a wonderful week. Good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday afternoon, August 10th, and currently it's actually after 3 o'clock, but I have the 2 o'clock official weather conditions, which I have researched in a very unique way to make sure that all of this was official, because the dew points were just getting so complicated. Very high humidity has spread across the Illinois area and areas just to the north, really northern Illinois, along with the surrounding areas. Not so much Milwaukee and not Racine, Wisconsin, but Kenosha, I think, is included in this. Northern Indiana definitely included. Many counties or cities are reporting a dew point of exactly 77 degrees. This includes Chicago. This includes South Bend, Indiana, along with a number of cities in Wisconsin, in South Central and Southwest Wisconsin. The Dells reporting a dew point of 79 degrees, and many places upper 70s pretty much for this area right around here. When you go further south into the St. Louis area, dew points have dropped to 75 degrees. That's because there's a thunderstorm over there. Temperatures have therefore dropped to 81 degrees, and the outflow also brings those dew points down, ironically, despite it rains during a thunderstorm, but the humidity actually gets less. When you go into Jefferson City, Missouri, and places around there, Columbia, Missouri, they're reporting dew points of 74 and 75 degrees, mid-70s, very humid, but nothing super unique or anything in that area. Hannibal, Missouri is unusually dry, uniquely dry. The dew point 66 degrees over there, and that is just really weird. Really weird to have a dew point. 66 is also humid, but it's not. It's nothing compared to what's going on every place else. Even Quincy, Illinois, which is right across the Mississippi River, is reporting dew points well into the 70s. But we are seeing that the real high humidity, the stuff that really only occurs on islands in the Gulf of Mexico, places perhaps like Galveston, Texas, places like that. Not even the Gulf Coast. Gulf Coast, you have mid-70 humidity dew points, but upper 70s. The upper 70s occurs usually on those little islands off of the Florida. Those islands surrounded by the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico have dew points in the upper 70s. Today we have actually a number of places on the Gulf Coast that also are reporting dew points in the upper 70s. What about dew points in the 80s? So I've not been able to look at a weather map, but I've been able to spot a city in Wisconsin where the air temperature is 92 degrees and the heat index is 116 degrees. That's probably the hottest in the country right now. Now, this city starts with a P, but I do not know the exact name of the city. But I give a rough estimation to what the dew point must be in order for a 92 degree air temperature to produce a heat index of 116. The dew point would have to be 82 degrees, and that's a rough estimation, but the more I think about it, the more accurate I think that is. It really must be 82 degrees, because if it was 81 degrees, the temperature would have to be 94 degrees, like we saw in Cape Girardeau a little while ago. The temperature was 94, dew point 81 degrees, producing a heat index of 116 degrees. Here we have an air temperature of 92 degrees, so I would assume the dew point has to be higher than 81 degrees, so it's going to be 82 degrees. I think 82 degrees would be that dew point. 82 degrees is Persian Gulf level humidity. That's made it into the Midwest here. Persian Gulf humidity. You have to go into this place in Wisconsin before you really feel what India feels like, what a place like India, not even on the Persian Gulf. India is not on the Persian Gulf at all, but India has comparable dew points. When you go into the Persian Gulf itself, it really is, these islands in the Persian Gulf are in a whole new level than islands in the Gulf of Mexico. These places are reporting dew points pretty frequently in the lower and mid 80s, even upper 80s, and upper 80s for some of these places in the Persian Gulf, the islands in the Persian Gulf, these little tiny islands. That one town the other day which had 776 families living in it, well over 4,000 people, so the family numbers, many of the families must have 10, 13 kids, other families 2 or 3 kids. Reporting over there was a dew point of 89 degrees, but other sources said 84 degrees. So I don't know what the official reading was in that city, but 84 to 89 degrees. Over here, the official at O'Hare Airport, 77 degrees for Chicago and 77 degrees for South Bend. Air temperature 91 degrees in Chicago at 2 o'clock p.m., producing a heat index of 104. South Bend 90 degrees, producing a heat index of 103. The heat indices over in a number of places in Wisconsin are up at 107 degrees. Certainly not Milwaukee. They are out of it, and so is Racine, Wisconsin. They're not in this extremely humid air at all. But in the Dells, they're reporting a dew point of 79 degrees, and no matter what the temperature is, heat index is going to have to be in the hundreds pretty much for there. But that one spot in Wisconsin where the heat index is 116 degrees, that is being reported by the National Weather Service on their phone line. This is certainly no mistake. This is not something coming from a website or from a computer. This is a real official dew point, official heat index of 116 with an air temperature of 92 degrees. Realize that the heat index is not like AccuWeather Real Feel, which takes a number of weather variables into consideration. The only thing heat index takes into consideration is humidity. So the humidity the dew point would have to be 82 degrees. And, in St. Louis, Missouri right now it's 81 degrees. It's not even possible for the dew point to be 82 degrees because the air temperature can never be lower than the dew point, for those who understand how the dew point works. So Iowa earlier today looked like there were some places which had a dew point of 80 degrees. There was a county in Missouri that reported dew points in the 80, but much of the 80-degree dew points would be in Illinois, and even in Illinois, it seems like it's generally about 77 degrees, and in Wisconsin, we have that one county with a dew point of 82 degrees. Severe weather is on the way for a good possibility. Thunderstorms with damaging winds may develop anywhere in the Chicago area between 6 o'clock p.m. and 11 o'clock p.m. Then they will die down. Another round of thunderstorms might move in after midnight. Now, the second round of thunderstorms, the main hazard is going to be torrential downpours. But during the first round of thunderstorms, the main hazard is going to be damaging winds. The National Weather Service says that each and every thunderstorm has the potential to uproot trees. That's how strong the winds will be. They're putting maximum winds at 70 miles per hour. The AccuWeather says 55 to 65 miles per hour with an AccuWeather max of 80 miles per hour. Those thunderstorms will be moving into northern Indiana a couple hours after Chicago. But the main hazard in Indiana is going to be, they're both going to be occurring at the same time, damaging winds and torrential downpours. The next couple of days will continue hot and humid with heat indexes, afternoon heat indexes between 101 and 106 in Chicago for Wednesday and Thursday, 95 to 105 for northern Indiana, with severe thunderstorms a possible risk tomorrow afternoon and again on Thursday afternoon. Cold front comes through later in the week, brings cooler and drier air, and that takes care of this podcast, and I wish everyone a wonderful day. Good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday afternoon, a very humid day across the Illinois area and surrounding states. Dew points, however, have dropped to an average about 1 degree over the past hour from 2 p.m. until 3 p.m. 2 o'clock, it seemed like dew points of 77 were pretty widespread. 3 o'clock dew points have pretty much dropped to 76 degrees in many locations. In fact, the Dells reported a dew point of 79 degrees at 2. That also dropped to 76 degrees at 3 o'clock. So conditions feel significantly cooler in some areas. Dew point in Chicago was 77 at 2 o'clock, 76 at 3. South Bend, Indiana, however, has maintained their 77-degree dew point. Also, temperatures have gone up, and over there it's 4 o'clock. The 4 o'clock p.m. temperature in the Eastern time is 92 degrees with a heat index of 191 degrees with the heat index of 104. That's a dew point of 77 for South Bend. Chicago also has a heat index of 104, but the air temperature is 102. The dew point is 76 degrees. The one shocker over here is Oshkosh, Wisconsin, which has gone up to 80 degrees. Oshkosh, Wisconsin now has a dew point of 80 degrees. Heat index over there is 104. I don't know what the air temperature is, but it's probably somewhere in the mid-80s, with the heat index again of 104 for Oshkosh, Wisconsin. We still have a city in the Wisconsin area where the air temperature is 91 degrees and the heat index is 113 degrees, so that would be a dew point of 81 degrees, maybe 82. It certainly was 82 degrees last hour when the air temperature was 92, heat index 116 degrees. The question is, did it go down a degree? I think it did. I think the dew point's probably 81 degrees in this city. It starts with the P, and it's probably going to be the highest heat index you're going to find in this area. Dew points have dropped in the St. Louis area. The temperatures dropped as well, down to 80 degrees. Thunderstorms pretty much out west have really ruined the competition over here in terms of dew points, and the highest dew points remain here in Illinois. We'll have to say Indiana as well, and Wisconsin. These three states are reporting really high dew points, and the Iowa area also is reporting significantly high dew points. Areas all the way from the Gulf of Mexico up into these areas are reporting dew points well into the 70s, dew points in the upper 70s along the Gulf Coast, and again the upper 70s when you come into the northern Illinois, and even some 80s in the Wisconsin area. Probably a couple of 80s in Iowa as well. I don't know if there's any 80-degree dew points in Indiana. Earlier today, I believe there was an 80-degree dew point in southeast Missouri. That brings this podcast to an end for right now. But I have to tell you that to me, I'm a little bit disappointed in this humidity, because to me it feels like the dew point, if I was to give my estimation on it, it feels like the dew point is 72 degrees to me, and it just feels like a classic St. Louis, the type of weather I grew up in, classic St. Louis hot and humid weather, nothing unusual. It feels like the dew point is 72 degrees, nothing really higher than that, but they're reporting the official dew point is 76 degrees. The air temperature is 92 degrees, heat index 104. And this is not exact. The question is, when does that suffocating dew point come in? When is I felt it once, and I want to know what exactly is that temperature. I'm going to say probably 78. Maybe it's 78. That's when like that suffocating humidity comes in. AccuWeather actually has dew points of 78 and higher in a whole new category. It's called either dangerously, there's very humid. That's a dew point of 67. I think extremely humid is like at 72 or something. Oppressively humid is at another, and then dangerously humid at a dew point of 78. So maybe 78 and higher, or maybe certainly 80 and higher. So I don't know if we've gotten that yet. Although one app reported Chicago had a dew point of 78 earlier today. We'll see if it goes back up this evening, if those dew points can go back up into the upper 70s, as AccuWeather originally was forecasting those dew points to start to go up at around 4 o'clock p.m. today. I wish everybody a great day. Good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday afternoon, August 10th, and it's after 4 o'clock p.m., and we have a new city that is reporting an 80-degree dew point. Kankakee, Illinois, dew point is reporting by the National Weather Service, reported to be 81 degrees. This comes from the weather radio, NOAA Weather Radio, the old-fashioned way of finding out about the weather. The official dew point in Kankakee is 81 degrees. Temperatures 90 degrees and the 91 degrees, and the heat index is 110 degrees. 110 degrees, temperature 91, dew point a sauna-like 81 degrees. Just amazing stuff. The Chicago dew point continues to be 76 degrees. And I'm pretty sure in South Bend it's 77 degrees, and we have the Oshkosh, Wisconsin, as of 3 p.m. was at 80 degrees. I don't know what the 4 o'clock update is for Oshkosh. And we have that other city which was reporting a dew point of 82 degrees in Wisconsin at 2 o'clock p.m. Probably dropped to 81 and 3, and I don't know what it's doing right now. But here is one ha'ara thought that I had today as I went outside, and I feel that the humidity is really not as suffocating as I thought it would be. Really, dew points to me feel like they were 72, and at this point, I tell you, I think the dew points even feel lower than 72, despite the fact the National Weather Service is reporting a dew point of 76. And I think here is the reason why, and this is a variable that I did not take into consideration, which will have to be taken into consideration next time. It has to do with the winds. The winds are quite strong here in the Chicago area, and the mechanism in which dew point makes temperature feel warmer is through reducing the evaporative cooling effect that the hot air has on the body. So the higher the humidity, the less evaporative cooling takes place, so the harder it is for sweat to evaporate, and it's the evaporation of the sweat which cools you off. Wind increases evaporation. So we have a dew point of 76 degrees, so ordinarily that would create an air temperature of 92 degrees, would make the temperature feel like 104 degrees. But if we add another variable into this whole thing called wind, that will increase the evaporative cooling. So while the humidity is decreasing the evaporative cooling, the wind is increasing the evaporative cooling, making it feel cooler outside. That is going to be making it feel cooler than 102 degrees. So I thought it felt like there was a dew point of 72 degrees. Now, a dew point of 72 degrees would put a heat index of 99 degrees instead of 104. That's reasonable, that the temperatures would feel about 5 degrees cooler because of the wind. That's reasonable. Now I'm starting to think that the dew point even feels lower than 72, maybe even closer to 69 degrees, which would, I'm thinking that the temperature might actually feel, in the shade, might actually feel more like 96 degrees. Air temperature is 92 degrees. Heat index is 104. I think it feels like 96 degrees out here, and it's certainly not a sauna-like, in my opinion, certainly not a sauna-like situation. So here's the variable that we have to throw into this sauna-like situation before one could say that we have a guarantee that conditions are going to feel like they do in the Persian Gulf. And that's something that Tom Skilling said. He said wind makes it feel cooler out until the the temperature hits 95 degrees or higher. When it's higher than 95, and I don't know what happens at 95, but when it's higher than 95, for some reason, the wind actually makes it feel warmer out. So what we need over here is we need a dew point in the upper 70s or low 80s or higher with a temperature of 95 or higher, or absolutely no wind. Then we could start to equate the situation over here to what it is out in the Persian Gulf, but until then, it's going to be quite difficult to do so. The last time I felt dew points in the low 80s took place during a heat wave of 1995, where the temperature was above 100 degrees, and it was an absolute suffocating sauna. That's not the situation today. It certainly is humid out, and it's certainly hot, but it's not that suffocating heat. But that's here in Chicago, where the dew point is 76 degrees. Up in Kankakee, temperatures feel at least 6 degrees warmer over there, where they have a dew point of 81 degrees. The temperature 91 degrees. Heat index 110 degrees over there, and I don't know what the wind is. We'll have to keep giving an update if we have more towns which are approaching dew points of 80 degrees. For right now, we have a severe thunderstorm watch which has been issued for northern Illinois and parts of northwest Indiana, including the Chicago area, until 10 o'clock p.m. Actually, the severe thunderstorm watch I don't think includes Indiana at all. It's just for the Chicago metropolitan area, and for the parts of Chicago that are in Illinois, we have a severe thunderstorm watch in effect until 10 o'clock p.m. Thank you for listening. Have a great evening. Good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday afternoon, August 10th. It's well after 4 o'clock p.m., and we are just going to be reporting that the heat index has finally reached heat advisory criteria for South Bend, Indiana, as of 4 o'clock p.m. Central Daylight Time, 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The heat index in South Bend was 105 degrees. I don't know if it's ever hit 105 here in Chicago yet for today. Heat index in Chicago remains at 104, and for many locations it remains between 100 and 105 degrees. Many areas around Chicago and in southern Wisconsin, we do also have quite a few cities where the heat index is 105 and a little bit higher than 105, somewhere between 105 and 108 degrees. Current temperature in South Bend, Indiana, 92 degrees, with a heat index with a dew point of 77 degrees, producing a heat index of 105 degrees. I don't know what the wind is over there, and that's something that must be taken into consideration, although it's not on the official heat index chart. But as we have pointed out, the wind increases evaporative cooling, as one could just go out into Chicago by the lake and you could feel that quite strongly, that in no way is the heat index here. That heat index, although it's 104 here in Chicago, it does not feel like 104. The humidity, the air does not feel as humid as what they are reporting, and that's because the humidity takes away from evaporative cooling, but the wind increases evaporative cooling, giving it more of a dry feel. So it is humid, but it's not that super humid, which a dew point of 76 degrees would normally represent, but I don't know what it's like in the other cities. We've already said that in Kankakee, the dew point's 81 degrees, heat index over there is 110. I don't know what the wind is over there, but I know in some of these locations, the winds have been 13 miles per hour. In Chicago, I would think it's closer to 20, somewhere between 15 and 20 miles per hour with higher gusts. If we do get a sauna-like effect, we'll have to wait until after sunset when these winds die down, if the dew points get a little bit higher than that. But dew points do remain at 77 for South Bend. We have a dew point of 81 in Kankakee, dew point of 80 degrees in Oshkosh. The dew point in the Dells in Wisconsin was at 79 2 hours ago. It has now dropped to 75 degrees. The dew point in Green Bay, Wisconsin is actually going way up and is now at 77 degrees. And that dew point goes up every hour, so we'll see what happens in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Have a great day. Good afternoon, everyone. It is Tuesday evening, actually, August 10th, and the extreme humidity as of 5 o'clock p.m. has moved into the Milwaukee area and has also included, it's either Racine or Kenosha. One of those cities is included, the other one is not. Extreme humidity with a dew point of 78 degrees in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Temperature 88 degrees, heat index is 103 for Milwaukee. Dew points remain at 77 for South Bend, Indiana. It's been 77 for the past several hours, consistently 77, and the dew point 76 here in the Chicago area. We do have Oshkosh, Wisconsin, which was reporting a dew point of 80 degrees at 4 o'clock. Dew points have dropped to 79 degrees, and the dew points have gone up in the Dells, back up to 77 degrees. On average, it seems like the dew points are generally 77 degrees. If you average it all out, the dew points have gone up. It looks like in Green Bay, it's either 76 or 77 degrees as that heat index hits 100 degrees with an air temperature of 88 degrees. That would mean a dew point of 76 or 77 degrees, and that's pretty much widespread 77 degree dew points. We don't have the update on Kankakee, which previously was reporting a dew point of 81 degrees. There's no question that many areas today hit a dew point in the low 80s in each state, and each state means Illinois, Wisconsin, Iowa, and possibly Missouri as well. The rest of this country, whether there were 80 degree dew points or not, is very unlikely unless you go to the extreme Gulf Coast, especially the islands, especially a place like Galveston or Corpus Christi, Texas. Those areas perhaps had a dew point of 80 degrees. This is very, very high humidity, and it produces oppressive conditions, dangerously hot and humid conditions. There's one thing, however, that I want to point out, and that's perhaps a more accurate way to determine a heat index is instead of plugging in the dew point, to plug in the wet bulb temperature, which should be pretty close to the dew point, but in windy conditions, the wet bulb temperature is actually lower than the dew point. And I'm wondering if that could take into consideration wind, and if we would have a more accurate feel for what the real field temperature is instead of heat index. Because, right now in the Dells, Wisconsin, the winds are only 3 miles per hour. Temperature is only 83 degrees. The dew point 77 degrees. But that 77 degrees is a solid, that means there's very little evaporative cooling, and a person could really heat up despite the fact the temperature is only 83 degrees. But in a place like in other areas in Wisconsin where winds are 13, 15 miles per hour and the dew points are 77 or 78 degrees, one has to wonder what type of evaporative cooling effect those winds have on the dew point, and it's really all about evaporative cooling. So that heat index is based upon what the evaporative cooling is when the dew point is such and such temperature, and the winds are, I don't know, is the heat index based upon winds which are 0 miles per hour, 5 miles per hour? This is something that has to be looked into, but if the winds are significantly higher than whatever that heat index chart had in mind, then we're going to have to reduce that dew point. We're going to have to say that although the dew point might be 78 degrees, but in regards to the heat index chart, we're going to have to plug in 76 degrees or something based upon the wind speed. This is something that has to be looked into. In general, when temperatures are above 50 degrees, there is no more wind chill. There's no more wind chill. So there can't be a wind chill, let's say. There's no significant wind chill, maybe not even by a degree or two, when temperatures are higher than 50 degrees. So we're certainly seeing temperatures higher than 50 degrees today. But what I'm wondering is that if the reason why it feels like 105 is not because the temperature is 105, but it's because there is reduced evaporative cooling due to a high dew point, due to lots of humidity. In that type of a situation, I would think there should be a wind chill. There should be a wind chill which reduces the heat index. It's not so much a wind chill on the temperature, it's a wind chill on the dew point. The the evaporative cooling that can be expected from a dew point of 78 degrees is not taking place. Instead, it's the equivalent of an evaporative cooling of a dew point of 74 degrees, perhaps because of a strong wind. That's something that I'm going to look into later on, and perhaps with that we'll have a more accurate picture of what the temperatures really feel like. Perhaps that's what AccuWeather does with their real field temperatures, although I think they also take other things into consideration. I always thought it gets too complex, but with this wind, after experiencing today, I think it is very important to include the wind as a variable in trying to figure out what that heat index is, and that wind strongly affects the evaporative cooling. Perhaps the wet bulb temperature would be a scientific, accurate way to determine what type of dew point should you enter into that heat index calculator when figuring out what the temperature is going to feel like. Should you actually put in the real dew point, or should you put in the wet bulb temperature? That is the question, and I think perhaps the answer is somewhere in between, which we will have to figure out for ourselves. But we certainly do have counties which have barely any wind at all, such as the Dells, and we have other places reporting 13 and 14 mile per hour winds. Chicago might even be higher than that. And of course, if you're going bike riding and the wind is blowing for you, you actually might not feel any wind at all. So if you're going 14 miles per hour and the winds are 14 miles per hour from the south and you're going north, the winds are 0 miles per hour for you, and it's going to be brutally hot. It's going to be extremely hot for a bike rider that is going in the direction of the wind, and I think they're the ones who are going to be feeling the heat index the most significantly here in the Chicago area, and those that are going into the wind are going to be feeling the heat index the least here in the Chicago area. Again, it will be interesting to find out all of this information, and we are under a severe thunderstorm watch until 10 o'clock for the Illinois counties. I don't have any updates in regards to Indiana, but thunderstorms are expected to move in after midnight in northwest Indiana, northeast Indiana, northwest Ohio, and southern Michigan. There's a chance for thunderstorms. It's delayed until after midnight. The Chicago area has their thunderstorms between 6 and 11 o'clock, with the severe thunderstorm watch ending at 10. And when we say 10, that means Central Daylight Time. And for the South Bend in northwest Ohio and southern Michigan, including Michigan City, actually, which might even be north central Indiana, the thunderstorms, that means midnight Eastern time. I wish everybody a great day. Enjoy the sauna weather. If you are in a place which is experiencing sauna weather, where you have a dew point, let's say, of 78 or higher, and a wind speed of 5 miles per hour or less, are there any counties like that around here? Well, I think that would be where the sauna would be. Or if you have an air temperature higher than 95, so according to Tom Skilling, the wind actually will make the air temperature feel warmer. I'm not sure how that works, but that's in terms of the air temperature. What about the effects of the dew point? What would a wind, when the air temperature is higher than 95, why would that affect the dew point? That has to be looked into. I think it's because the wind is actually blowing hotter air into your body. Your body temperature is 98. Maybe somehow that translates to 95 on the surface. So when you have a wind blowing 100-degree air into the body, the wind is not blowing the heat away from your body. The wind is actually blowing hot air into your body. So that's what it's doing. But on the other hand, in terms of evaporative cooling, I would think no matter what, the wind is going to increase the evaporative cooling. So perhaps if you're in a place like Death Valley, California, winds which are higher than 95, happening when the air temperature is higher than 95 degrees, certainly higher than 98 or 99 degrees, that's blowing heat into your body. But if we're dealing with high humidity areas, so perhaps it's more complex. These are just questions to ponder, and perhaps we'll have an answer later on. But thank you for listening. Everyone have a great night. afternoon, everyone. It is Wednesday afternoon, August 11th. The hot and humid weather continues across the Midwest. In fact, it's spreading to the East Coast and also in the Northwest Pacific. On the weather map today, we have two major domes of heat, which are really affecting a very large part of this country. In fact, the weather map shows 90s everywhere, except for places which are in the hundreds, and except for International Falls, Minnesota, where temperatures are in the 70s. Now, also Minneapolis is in an area where temperatures are in the 80s, and much of Wisconsin has highs in the 80s. A lot of that is due to thunderstorms, for at least for Wisconsin. The thunderstorms is what's holding those temperatures back into the 80s. Now, look at this. On the East Coast, you see these temperatures are in the 90s, all the way up into past Baltimore, really. And then when you hit New York, temperatures drop into the 80s, but temperatures heat up again into the 90s. And then when you go into the Maine area, temperatures heat up into the hundreds. Into the hundreds. This is so strange. This is really strange. Temperatures heat up into the hundreds according to this weather map in the Tribune, and I wonder if it's a mistake. But in any case, regardless of whether it's a mistake for today or not, there certainly is excessive heat headed into the New York area and Boston area for tomorrow and Friday, as high temperatures go into the mid-90s for those two cities, highs around 100 degrees for Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. And if you look at those dew points are going to be oppressively high for New York, Baltimore, Boston, dew points in the mid-70s. Also, here's another thing. If you look at the wind speeds, there will not be much wind at all. Now, let's take a look, just reflect upon the heat index chart just for a moment. I want to point out that the heat index chart was made for conditions of 5.6 mile per hour wind speeds. That's what it was made for. So yesterday, we had oppressively high peak heat index values in the Chicago metro area. Some areas, like in North Aurora, was 115 degrees. Joliet, 113 degrees. However, if you look at the wind speeds, they were approximately 15 miles per hour. Now, a 15 mile per hour wind speed increases the evaporative cooling of a wet bulb thermometer of 3 degrees. And if you look at this, there's like a wind chill chart for the heat index, but the wind chill chart is not really a chart. It only tells you certain temperatures and only certain humidities, and it only tells you if the wind speed's 33 miles per hour. So I could tell you I approximated that the temperatures would have felt about 6 degrees cooler, anywhere between 3 and 6 degrees cooler than what they actually were, because of those 15 mile per hour wind speeds. In addition, their dew points probably felt a little bit lower than what they actually were due to those 15 mile per hour wind speeds. Much of the afternoon during the peak heating here in Chicago, we had a dew point of 76 degrees officially. Because of those 15 mile per hour wind speeds, I think the dew point felt more like 74 degrees. Nothing spectacular, certainly not Persian Gulf level humidity in any. It certainly did not feel like that when you're dealing with a dew point of 74. South Bend, Indiana generally had a dew point of 77 degrees, which is certainly oppressively humid. But again, over there also there was this constant 15 mile per hour wind, at least at the place where the official reporting station was located. And therefore those dew points probably felt more like 75 degrees in South Bend, which is still extremely humid. When you go into so when you see these heat index values, realize that they're probably off by 3 to maybe even up to 6 degrees or more, but we're still dealing with, in some locations, of heat index approximately 110 degrees in many locations. Now, here is where you get into the Persian Gulf level humidity. When you go into Monticello, Iowa, the cornfields of Iowa, 86 degree dew point. Monticello, Iowa. That's you need a moment of, you have to reflect upon that. What does that feel like? 86 degree dew point. Even in your bathtub, the dew points do not get to 86 degrees. This is like extremely intense stuff. Fairfield, Iowa, a dew point of 86 degrees. Now, what's the difference between a dew point of 76 degrees in Chicago and a dew point of 86 degrees in Iowa. Well, what's the difference between 76 and 86? They're both extremely humid, right? Well, I'll tell you, the difference is probably about a 25 degree temperature difference. If you were to, it would be the difference between a temperature of 75 or 100. It's extremely vast. The difference is huge. You know, when the temperatures go above 75 degrees, dew points go above 75 degrees, temperatures feel generally approximately 2 degrees warmer for every degree you go. And when you start to approach dew points of 86, temperatures start to feel about 3 degrees warmer for every degree up you go. Now, when temperatures are only in the low 90s, it's a little bit less than that. It's closer to 1 degree. When you go above 75, closer to 2 degrees as you approach 76. But even so, temperatures probably felt about 20 degrees warmer over there than what they did here in the Chicago area. So now I didn't look at the wind speeds over there. Probably they were less over there. That's what I think. But anyways, you have Washington, Iowa, dew point 84 degrees. You know, you realize what's the least... What if the temperature, let's say the temperature was 90 degrees, dew point 86 degrees? I mean, even that, you're dealing with a heat index at least into the mid or upper 100 and teens. So maybe even closer to 120 degrees. It's 91, no, it wouldn't be 120, it would be in the 100 and teens. And all these places, Platteville, Wisconsin, heat index 116, dew point 83 degrees. The highest dew point ever in Chicago was 83 degrees. Highest dew point ever in St. Louis was 83 degrees. Highest dew point in many cities, in the places which get real humid by the Gulf Coast, a lot of cities, I think the highest dew point reported was 83. In many locations, there's one time I looked it up, but we saw yesterday dew points surpassed 83 degrees in places in Iowa and even in Illinois. We had a place which passed the dew point of 83 degrees in Rochelle, Illinois. We have Kankakee, Illinois. Dew point was 82 degrees. This is really unbelievable stuff. And those dew points are way down today. Way down today. It's super humid today, but it's not like yesterday. The dew points are not like what they were yesterday. And those thunderstorm complexes last night, wow, were they intense. Those thunderstorms, one could just, you could just imagine the amount of energy that those storms had to work with, because dew point is a form of energy. Just like air temperature is a form of energy, but dew point's also a form of energy, perhaps even more so. And when you're dealing with thunderstorms which are fueled by not only hot air temperatures, but even high dew points which are in some areas in record territory, mid 80, 86 degrees. This is... The thunderstorm complex started off in eastern Iowa. It was those dew points which were fueling these thunderstorms. You could just imagine, and we saw with our own eyes what those thunderstorms were producing, just amazing things. Some of the storms had 70 mile-per-hour wind gusts. And we're going to see another development of those storms later on today. I believe the Chicago area... The severe thunderstorm watch, I believe, expired at 1 p.m. There's a tornado watch in effect for the Wisconsin area. I think there is a severe thunderstorm watch in effect for South Bend, Indiana until 5 o'clock p.m. Those thunderstorms are holding those temperatures down. So many places there are heat advisories right now, but it does not feel hot at all. Many places are only in the 70s, and that's because of the rain and those clouds. But realize, if the sun comes out even for a couple of hours this afternoon, those temperatures are going to go shooting up very quickly, and I think it's questionable, will we make it to 90 or not? Right now, temperatures remain in the 70s here in the Chicago area, but the sun is out. The sun is finally out at full force, and I think we are going to see those temperatures rise into the low 90s later today. The reason I think that is because I've seen stuff like this happen in the month of May, but not in Chicago, really, where you just have the sun comes out and you have those temperatures just shoot way up. So they're forecasting highs in the lower 90s here in Chicago. Tom Skilling says 93. I don't know if it's going to make it to 93 at this point, but low 90s sounds fine. While that happens, we'll have a heat index of 105 on the official official heat index chart. I think it's going to feel more like the upper 90s because of the wind, maybe even low hundreds because of the wind, not quite 105. In any case, but because of the sun, the sun makes it feel 15 degrees hotter than what it actually is. So it's all going to balance out. Not exactly balance out. The sun really is gonna outdo the wind as it usually does. But we have another hot day also for tomorrow. Some cities are actually under an excessive heat warning. Now the reason for that, this is a city like St. Louis, Missouri, I think Kansas City as well. Just those areas, and I think the reason for that is because of something called the urban heat island effect, where because of all the concrete of these cities, the temperatures, especially at night, are going to remain warmer than the outlying areas. Daytime temperatures, therefore, also might be slightly hotter in those cities, and the combination of those two things together is going to create continuous heat indices of peak heat indices of 105 or higher, and there's an excessive heat warning in effect through Thursday evening for St. Louis and Kansas City. Excessive heat warning in effect for Thursday for New York City, Baltimore, Washington, D.C. Baltimore, I think it's only a watch right now, but it's soon going to become a warning if it hasn't already. Temperatures are in the low 90s for many places in the southeast. The Bermuda high pressure is unusually west, very far west, more than normal right now. The Bermuda high pressure is all the way almost basically touching the coast, and it's actually, if you look in the weather map, it actually is inland right now. It's on land, and it's pumping. You have a south flow as opposed to a southwest flow. At least yesterday, there was a south flow going into the St. Louis area, and even in Chicago, there was more of a southerly flow than a southwest flow, and therefore the dew points, that, according to the St. Louis National Weather Service, that has been a variable in why the dew points have been so high. I think when you get into the Midwest Corn Belt, I don't know what type of difference it really makes. It's southwest flow or south flow. Perhaps it does make somewhat of a difference. Today, perhaps the winds are more from the southwest, and that's why the dew points are just in the lower and mid 70s. Dew point in St. Louis back down to 72 degrees, the classic dew point in the St. Louis area. Brutal heat develops again in the Pacific Northwest. It's almost like the atmosphere has a memory to it, where it's like it happened in June, it happened again earlier in July, happened later in July, it's happening now in August. Nothing compares to what happened in June for the Pacific Northwest, but temperatures were expected to hit 105 degrees in Portland, Oregon, either on Friday or Shabbos. But was it Friday or Shabbos? I'm not sure. Or was that Portland, Oregon? Highs of high of 108. The Tribune says a high of 108 tomorrow in Portland, Oregon. However, there's a lot of smoke from the wildfires, and some of those forecasts are lowering those temperatures. They're going down because the smoke is blocking out the sun. There's also expected to be dry thunderstorms, basically matches, which are going to be flying across the sky, clouds, which just produce lightning and light up more forest fires. That's what's going on in the Pacific Northwest. That's what's going to be happening over the next few days. One more thing, there's a lot of more things, but there's a wind. When temperatures are above 95 degrees, winds will make it feel warmer than what it actually is in almost all conditions, unless it's very humid. Then winds will continue to make it feel cooler, but once it hits about 100 degrees, even if it's humid, the winds will make it feel hotter. And the reason for this is there's two ways in which the winds cool us off. Number one, it increases evaporative cooling. Number two, it blows our body heat away, so it cools us off. But once it's above 95, the 98.6 degree body temperature somehow translates to 95 degrees on the surface. Once it's above 95, the heat is actually being blown into your body. The overheating air temperatures which are hotter than the body. I guess for sure when it's 99, but the charts show 95 already. It's being blown into the body. The heat is being blown into the body, so it's drenching the body with heat that it cannot handle. So winds above 95 make the temperatures feel warmer than what they actually are. If you look at these charts, not by a lot, maybe by 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 degrees warmer than what they actually are. When there's more humidity, for some reason, it doesn't work out like that. But In any case, that's something to keep in mind when people think it's a dry heat out there. Therefore, the heat index, in terms of the humidity, the heat index is actually lower than the temperature. But when you look at the winds, you might end up actually having real field temperatures significantly higher than the temperatures. That's certainly true when it comes to the sun. But we all know that the sun makes things feel hotter, and therefore it's not really necessary to report that on a forecast, according to many. But these other things are crucial variables that could really change the way things feel. Especially the wind in a dry heat. People are expecting it to feel cooler in a dry heat, but the winds might actually make it feel warmer. We're talking about excessive heat. Hottest temperature yesterday in this country was 109 degrees in Death Valley, California. The weather map shows a continuation of monsoon moisture over Arizona, especially Arizona. Phoenix, Arizona, highs in the mid-90s. Today, lows in the low 80s. It's not common to see only a 14-degree difference between night and day in Phoenix, Arizona. That's something you would find more in like Miami, Florida, and that's probably because the humidity is so high over there as we speak right now. We have a normal high today here in Chicago, 82 degrees, normal low 64, record high 98 degrees, 1941, record low 47 degrees, 1982. The heat index yesterday in South Bend, Indiana hit 105 degrees late in the afternoon. Temperature was 92 degrees. Dew point was 77 degrees. I would actually think the heat index would be 106, but it was 105 degrees. In the Chicago area, heat index hit 104 degrees. Maximum dew point yesterday at O'Hare Airport, 79 degrees. And I believe the same was true for South Bend. At a certain point, it did hit 79 degrees. So officially, Chicago did not have an 80-degree dew point, but there were plenty of places within the Chicago metro area, including Valparaiso, Indiana, dew point at 80 degrees, and Sterling, 82, Kankakee, 82 degrees. And then again, in Iowa, we had places which had 86-degree dew points. Here's something of significance here. We have a tropical storm, which is named Fred, and expected to form near the Dominican Republic by early Wednesday. And there is a storm track here put into the paper here. And the storm track shows by 2 p.m. Shabbos, this storm will be going just west of Florida, but there's the possibility that the storm will be going just east of Florida, and there's also a possibility that the storm will be going right over Florida. So, and then the storm will continue to track. It looks like it's going to be tracking into the extreme northwest Florida, or right along the border of Alabama, of Georgia, in Alabama and in North Florida. But there is a possibility that the storm may go as far west and track as far west as New Orleans, Louisiana, or just to the east of New Orleans, Louisiana. Now, will this storm become a hurricane? That's a good kasha. It's a good question here. And the place that I'm looking at, it does not have an answer at the moment for that. We have 75 degrees was the Sunday Chicago shore water temperature. There are places in Lake Michigan reporting a water temperature of 77 degrees, and we also have the crib water temperature of 71 degrees. Southwest winds for today, 2 to 4 feet are the wave heights, and 1 to 3 feet are the wave heights for tomorrow. 7:55 p.m. is Shkia. It's sunset over here in Chicago. I estimate that in South Bend it's 8:49 p.m. We're going to have a cold front, which is going to move through the Chicago area on Friday. Showers and thunderstorms in the morning, but eventually moving south of Chicago. And we're finally going to see partly sunny, cooler and less humid, with highs in the mid-80s and cooler near the lake as the winds turn off the lake. But on Shabbos, we have the temperatures mid-70s near the lake, mid-80s well inland. Those winds will continue to be off the lake with lots of sunshine, and that continues to be the pattern on Sunday as well. Mid-70s for highs by the lake, mid-80s well inland. And then on Monday, it's a little bit different as winds become more southerly. Temperatures will remain cooler near the lake, but highs low to mid 80s inland. And then winds start to become even more southerly on Tuesday, and inland temperatures start to go up towards the upper 80s. Probably mid-80s, but more towards the upper 80s. But near the lake, it will continue to be slightly cooler. Probably actually mid-70s on Tuesday as well, near the lake. Overnight lows in the 60s for the next 7 days, mid and upper 60s. Coolest night Friday night, lows near low to mid-60s on Friday night. That takes care of the podcast for right now. We covered the heat wave in the Pacific Northwest. We covered the heat wave on the East Coast. We covered the heat wave here in the Midwest. We covered the severe thunderstorms, which happened yesterday, happening again today, and expected to happen again tomorrow in the Midwest. Also, the Northeast will be having to deal with these thunderstorms. And we covered Tropical Storm Fred, which will be forming near the Dominican Republic by early Wednesday, along with Persian Gulf level humidity, Momish Persian Gulf, not Gulf of Mexico level humidity. This is Persian Gulf level humidity, stuff that only occurs in the Persian Gulf where the water temperature is 94 degrees. Dew points are in the mid-80s over there. In Iowa yesterday, we had dew points in the mid-80s. We don't get this in the Gulf of Mexico. The highest you'll ever see, generally upper 70s, once in a while 80 or 81 degrees. Dew points in the mid-80s is a true rarity. It did occur once in Louisiana where the dew point hit 90 degrees. That did happen once. So I guess it could happen. It could happen on the Gulf. I don't know. Maybe somebody was taking a bubble bath or something and the dew point hit 90 degrees. But in any case, that brings this podcast to an end. I wish everybody a wonderful day. Enjoy your week. Good afternoon, everyone. It is Wednesday, August 11th, and I think the most remarkable part of the weather today is actually what happened yesterday. Persian Gulf levels humidity has made its way into the Midwest as dew points went into the low and even the mid-80s. We had counties in Iowa which were reporting, Fairfield, Iowa, reported a dew point of 86 degrees. 86 degrees is the type of dew point you would find on an island if it's surrounded by water with the water temperature of 96 degrees. Generally, it's about 10 degrees lower than the water temperatures. So this is the type of stuff that we don't even get in the Gulf of Mexico. Those water temperatures are in the upper 80s usually, perhaps 90 degrees, so dew points are usually peak dew points in the upper 70s. That's when you look at the islands off of Florida, the islands off of Florida, not Miami Beach, but the islands. A lot of times you'll see dew point 78, maybe even 79 degrees. Galveston, Texas, when the winds are from the right direction, it has the halachic stat, it has the din of an island. It's as if it's an island. So you'll see dew points sometimes 79 degrees. Corpus Christi, Texas also. But 80 degrees is more rare, and 81 degrees also. But sometimes you do get water temperatures 91 degrees in the Gulf of Mexico. Persian Gulf is a whole new world. Water temperatures go up into the mid and upper 90s. Right now we have a water temperature by this city. It's an island. It starts with a D. Water temperature in the Persian Gulf 94 degrees, and you'll see the dew point many times is 84 degrees in that city. Dubai also, and United Arab Emirates sometimes reports dew points about 84 degrees, but those dew points over there fluctuate. And we have some cities over there which have enormous fluctuation in dew points, stuff that it's unimaginable, going from dew points in the 30s to the 80s to the 30s to the 80s, all within a day. And I'll tell you the truth, I really think any forecaster for those cities should just forget about air temperatures. That's not the point of a forecast. Is to tell you how hot it's going to be. The air temperatures are going to be 110. You know, all the dew points, that's what the forecast should be. In a city like that, you have some cities over there which, when the winds are from the south or the west, the dew points go down into the 30s, and when the winds are from the east, from the north, or depending on where the city is, when the winds are off the water, dew points go into the 80s. When they're not off the water, the desert dryness comes in and dew points drop into the 30s. That's the difference. Dew points in the 80s, we're talking about temperatures feeling 30 degrees warmer than they actually are. Dew points in the 30s, temperatures feel up to 15 degrees cooler than they actually are, provided there's no wind. So the forecast should be in dew point. That's it. When you're dealing with places like that, I even think that forecast should be in dew points in the cornfields of Iowa when dew points start to get this high. 86 degree dew point again. Plenty of low to mid 80 dew points in Iowa. The Chicago metropolitan area had dew points of 82 degrees. Kankakee, Illinois, 80 degree dew point in Valparaiso, Indiana. The official dew point in Chicago, the highest at O'Hare Airport and in South Bend, 79 degrees. The hottest temperature yesterday, 92 degrees in Chicago. At the time that it was 92, the dew point was 76 degrees, producing a heat index of 104. And in South Bend, the dew point was 77 and a temperature of 92, producing a heat index of 105. The winds, however, were between 12 and 15 miles per hour. Those types of winds make the temperatures feel, at least the evaporative cooling effect increases, making temperatures feel 3 degrees. It has a 3-degree evaporative cooling effect. That means the wet bulb temperature decreases. It goes down 3 degrees when you have 15 mile per hour winds. That's a scientific accurate. That's a objective. 3 degrees is objective. So at least 3 degrees cooler. The heat index might have been 104, but the evaporative cooling effect did not have the same. Was not on a 104 degree level, it was only a 101 degree level. The heat index chart is made for wind speeds of 5.6 miles per hour. Come to think of it, the wet bulb temperature decreases 1 degree when the winds are 5.6 miles per hour. So let's change that. We're going to say it felt 2 degrees cooler than whatever that heat index was. But that means the evaporative cooling was 2 degrees cooler. The wind also has an additional cooling effect, which is that it blows the hot air away from your body. It blows it out of the body. That's provided temperatures are under 95 degrees. When they're over 95, the winds actually produce overheating. The temperatures actually start to feel several degrees warmer than what they actually are. It's extremely dangerous when you have windy conditions in a desert. Very dangerous. Much different when it's windy and not windy. It feels much hotter, and it's extremely dangerous for your body when you have windy conditions in desert heat, like Death Valley, California. The winds really add a lot of stress to the heat. That it makes it really impossible that you have heat blowing into the body. Overheated air temperatures, which are hotter than the body temperature, is blowing into the body. The body has no way it's nothing to work with to cool itself off. But when temperatures are under 95, the winds make temperatures feel cooler. For example, when the temperature is 86 degrees and the dew point's 86 degrees, you have 100% relative humidity, the temperature feels 26 degrees warmer than it actually is. So its heat index is 112. But with a 33 mile per hour wind, it feels the heat index feels not 112. The heat index, of course, remains 112 because it doesn't take wind into consideration. But it doesn't feel 112. It feels like 100. It feels 12 degrees cooler. That's when the wind's 33 miles per hour. When the humidity drops, the wind has a less of an effect. When the humidity drops and when the temperature drops as well. So we did not have dew points of 86 degrees. And the winds were not 33 miles per hour, but nonetheless, the winds had to have done something. So we have 2 degrees from the evaporative cooling, and probably a little bit more. Maybe it felt 3 degrees, perhaps 4 degrees cooler than what the heat index actually said, assuming you're away from sunlight. The sunlight could produce up to 15 degrees warmer than what it actually is. But for Chicago, I saw that might only be 8 degrees, and that's at midday. It depends on the angle of the sun, and the sun is never directly overhead here in Chicago. Okay, done with that. But we'll have the heat index, peak heat index, Chicago 104, felt more like 101 according to what we're saying here, and in South Bend 105. There also was a 15-mile-per-hour wind in South Bend, so that was the story over there. All these brutal humidity levels moving off to the East Coast, it translates into dew points in the mid-70s. They do not have the cornfields, and therefore the dew points are in the mid-70s. Winds in New York City approximately between 5 and 6 miles per hour, so the heat index is going to be accurate over there. Excessive heat warnings in effect for tomorrow for Baltimore, New York City, Boston. High temperatures mid-90s for Boston and New York City. Upper 90s in Baltimore, 100 degrees in Washington, D.C. Heat index values are going to be well into the 110s for most of those cities. Going into the Pacific Northwest, high temperature expected to be 108 for Portland, Oregon, and the smoke is getting so intense that some of the forecasters are reducing their forecasts, reducing those temperatures to a high of only 104 for Portland, Oregon. High temperature in Seattle, Washington, 96 degrees on Friday, breaking the old record of 92 degrees. Dry thunderstorms may move across the Pacific Northwest, igniting more forest fires. There's over 100 fires in the continent right now, but 79 of them are taking place in the Pacific Northwest. Temperature, lots of humidity in Arizona with thunderstorms due to the monsoon. Only a 14-degree difference between night and day in Phoenix, Arizona, a true rarity. That's something you would find on the Gulf Coast, but it's happening in Phoenix, Arizona. High temperatures in the mid-90s. Hottest temperature in the U.S. yesterday was 109 degrees. That took place in Death Valley, California. The one city that we have not seen on the hottest temperature chart yet, and if we have, it's been rare, is Rio Grande Village, Texas. Coldest temperature yesterday, it's turning into fall. It looks like coldest temperature was only 20 degrees. Not only coldest temperature, 20 degrees in Petersburg, Utah. That was the coldest temperature yesterday. Record high today, 98 degrees for Chicago, Quebec, 1948. The record low was 47 degrees. Normal high, 82 degrees. Normal low, 64 degrees. Chicago shore temperature, 75 degrees. Crib temperature, 71 degrees. Waves today, 2 to 4 feet. Tomorrow, 1 to 3 feet. We have a tornado watch in effect for Wisconsin. Severe thunderstorm watch in effect for another 15 minutes for South Bend, Indiana, until 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, I believe. And Chicago, the severe thunderstorm watch expired at 1 o'clock this afternoon. There will likely be another one issued later on today. Hot and humid weather for today for Chicago and areas which are not experiencing thunderstorms or clouds this afternoon. High temperatures in the low 90s here in Chicago. Could you believe it? It's already looks like it's in the low 90s. A couple hours ago it was in the 70s, but it's back into the low 90s. Heat index values 100 to 105 this afternoon, despite whatever despite the feel, what's the word? I forgot the word. But despite whatever it felt like this morning and even early this afternoon when temperatures were in the 70s, the heat finally has made it into Chicago. The dew points are not nearly as high today as they were yesterday. Those oppressive dew points, generally speaking, have moved on east and have dissipated to dew points in the 70s. But there are places in the cornfields of Iowa that have already reported dew points in the 80s today. So we'll have to keep on top of that situation. We had a city in Wisconsin yesterday that had a heat index of 116 degrees, Plattfield, Wisconsin. And that brings this podcast to an end. If it wasn't for the fact that we have Tropical Storm Fred that developed earlier today, it will be moving onto the Florida coast and affecting the Gulf states probably this weekend. And I don't know whether it's turning into a hurricane or not, but it is Tropical Storm Fred. That would make the A, B, C, D, E, what is that, the fifth one? No, the sixth storm of the season. Tropical Storm Fred, that's the sixth storm of the season. Just to finish off the last little touch here, the Bermuda high is really strong and has moved further west than usual and is really basically on land on the Carolinas. That is a dome of heat that is affecting the East Coast. That also brought winds from more southerly direction in the Midwest yesterday, which is responsible for the high dew point air, according to the St. Louis National Weather Service. The winds are more southwesterly today. There's another dome of heat, a major dome of heat, which is offshore, the Northwest Pacific. That's responsible for the intense heat over there. Excessive heat warnings in effect for many parts of this country. St. Louis, Missouri has an excessive heat warning. The areas surrounding St. Louis have only a heat advisory, and the same is true for Kansas City. That's due to the heat urban island effect of big cities. The concrete creates warmer temperatures at night and a little bit warmer temperatures during the day. That creates excessive heat warnings, and that's what we have on the East Coast as well for tomorrow from New York City, Boston, and Baltimore. High temperatures again from 94 to 100 depending on where you are on the East Coast. Temperatures mid to upper 90s on Friday, mid 90s again for Boston and New York City. Severe thunderstorm outbreaks expected every day until the cooler and drier air arrives here in the Midwest on Friday for Chicago, Friday afternoon for Chicago, probably Friday night or Shabbos morning for South Bend, and then later on for the East Coast. High temperatures Shabbos through Tuesday, highs in the mid-70s at the Chicago beaches, mid-80s inland, overnight lows generally mid-60s, maybe even low 60s Friday night, upper 60s by Tuesday night. That will be the cooler and drier air mass, which I believe will be affecting the East Coast as well. I wish everybody a wonderful day. Enjoy the thunderstorms if you like them, and enjoy the hot weather if you like that, and the cooler weather coming in on Shabbos if you like that. For here, temperatures also, by the way, becoming cooler in the Northwest Pacific for next week, eventually dropping into the 80s in places which are in the hundreds. Those 90s and hundreds are even in southern Canada as well. And we're seeing actually dew points approaching the low 60s over there. So it's not really so dry there either, especially light in Canada. Have a great week.